All right. Well, as many of you guys know that have been following the channel, uh, I mostly follow boxing. That's the sport that I followed all my life, and that's the sport that I know most about. But I do watch other sports. I love basketball, and I do watch MMA occasionally. I consider myself a casual MMA fan, and I have followed the career of Brock Lesnar since he came into the UFC. And let's look at the facts here. I mean, Brock Lesnar is a legitimate MMA fighter. I'm not going to question his legitimacy. He's definitely not in the same type of category that you would put CM Punk in. CM Punk's a WWE wrestler with really no fighting experience in any sector of the fight game. He was not a professional wrestler, to my knowledge. Wasn't a seasoned boxer. Didn't have any training in martial arts in any form, or at least he was not, a guy who was um, a master practitioner or an extensive practitioner in any of those arts. He was basically a wrestler trying to transition into becoming an MMA fighter, whereas Brock Lesnar was an all-American wrestler, definitely an athlete, played professional football, and he came into the UFC and he became champion and he beat some legitimate guys: Frank Mir, Shane Carwin, Randy Couture, just to name a few. So he's definitely a legitimate fighter. I'm not going to, question his success in the UFC and in MMA. But what I will question is his record as of late and his situation as of late. And does that justify him being able to just jump back into the UFC and challenge Daniel Cormier for his heavyweight title in the UFC? Now, I'm going to point to a Facebook post that Tommy Rainone posted, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase a few things that he said because it's a rather long post. I don't want to read the whole thing. But he mentioned, Brock Lesnar is a 41-year-old WWE wrestler who has a 5-3-1, and the one is the no contest against Mark Hunt. Um, he's 5-3-1 in MMA, and he hasn't won since 2010, and he's winless in his last 3 fights, and he failed 2 PED tests, and all of a sudden, he just can jump back in to the UFC and challenge for a title after failing 2 PED tests and after not winning a fight in his last 3, and not actually winning a fight since 2010. But in 2018, he's just going to jump back in and fight Daniel Cormier for the UFC heavyweight title. And what's funny is Dana White for years, not recently because he's changed his tune, but I remember back when the UFC was being questioned and it was being compared to boxing a lot, and UFC and Dana White would always have to kind of market themselves as being the next best thing in combat sports. They also would always insinuate that UFC and MMA superior to boxing and this and that, and how MMA and the UFC does not have the same problems that boxing has. They're much more legitimate. They're much more organized. They're not going to make the same mistakes that boxing has made. And we've criticized a lot of things that happen in boxing, how guys just get ranked that shouldn't be ranked. Guys get title shots that shouldn't be getting title shots. A lot of these catch weight fights. Dana White pointed to all this stuff in the past and said, we're never going to be like boxing. We're never going to do the same things that boxing has done. But lo and behold, this is a page right out of boxing, one of the ills of boxing, I should say, not boxing as a whole now, but this is one of the ills of boxing that we're so critical of as boxing fans, how guys can just get title shots and really not have earned them. And, a lot of that is based off their name or who they're connected to or what have you. And Dana White is doing the same thing here. So you can't question the legitimacy of boxing and criticize the mistakes that boxing has made over the years and still continues to make without looking at a situation like this and without pointing to the hypocrisy of Dana White, who had made several claims in the past and even recently that we're not going to be like boxing and we're not going to make the same mistakes. And what are you doing? you are making the same mistakes. You are taking a page out of the ills of boxing, the things in the sport that have been highly criticized and the things that we do not like about the sport. And you're taking a guy, basically, who really hasn't earned a title shot and hasn't been fighting for a couple of years and failed 2 PED tests and hasn't won a fight since 2010 and is winless in his last 3 fights. And all of a sudden, you're allowing this guy to just come in to the UFC and challenge for a title. And no one really even brings up the drug test that much. No one really criticizes Brock Lesnar like they criticize John Bones Jones. Look at the hypocrisy in that. Dana White was upset with John Jones, didn't even want to talk to him. He was disgusted. And I'm not saying he doesn't have the right to feel that way, but where are those feelings when it comes to Brock Lesnar? When he did the same thing, pretty much, failing 2 drug tests as well, and he gets a slap on the wrist, and he gets back, he can jump right back into the mix, and no one seems to care. And Dana White doesn't seem to be overly critical or concerned with the situation when it comes to Brock Lesnar, but he was tearing the hell out of John Jones. He was ripping him apart. How disgusted he was with John Jones. So that's a double standard right there. It's like when Dana White likes a fighter like Ronda Rousey, she didn't have to do press for her fight with Amanda Nunes. But meanwhile, Conor McGregor had requested, he missed a press conference one time, and I believe he was fined, and I think he was taken off of a card because of it. And meanwhile, Ronda Rousey doesn't have to do any press for a fight. So this preferential treatment that Dana White has for specific fighters that he seems to like is very unfair, and is very inconsistent, and you can see the bias that he has for certain fighters. And if that's acceptable and if that's the way you run an organization, then I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right. I think more people should be talking about it. I think Dana White should be called out on it. And I don't think it's right that Brock Lesnar can just jump right back into the mix and get a title shot after all those things that I just mentioned. I don't think so. I think it's wrong. And I know he's a big name, and I know he could probably generate a lot of revenue, but so could John Jones. John Jones was a big name too. But maybe Brock Lesnar is a bigger name because he has that WWE following. I get it. But I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to other fighters who probably have earned the spot legitimately and deserve the shot probably more than Brock Lesnar. And this is not to say that, again, he's a legitimate fighter. He's a former UFC champion. It's not like he's not qualified in terms of skill. I mean, I don't know how much he has left at 41 and coming off 2 losses and a no contest. But with that being said, he's been out for a while. Who's to say he hasn't been on PEDs while he's been out? He definitely has a history of using PEDs. And if I'm Daniel Cormier, I'm going to be very concerned about getting in there with Brock Lesnar. And I'm going to, recommend that they test the shit out of him. But even still, all this time that he's been out, and he could have been reaping the benefits of being on the PEDs while not being in the UFC. I don't know. I'm sure he wasn't tested while he was out because he wasn't an active UFC fighter. He was in the WWE, so technically he was probably semi-retired, and no one was monitoring him during that time out. So who's to say he wasn't, doing things that he wasn't supposed to be doing while he was out and not fighting in the UFC? So I think the same scrutiny should be held upon Brock Lesnar that's being, used against John Jones. I mean, John Jones is definitely under the microscope, and I think Brock Lesnar should be under the microscope as well. Let's see if he is. Let's see what happens. Let's see if he can stay clean if this fight gets signed, and let's see if he passes all the USADA tests. I'm curious to see that. Again, I'm not the PED police, but if you sign a contract and you agree to be a clean fighter, and your opponent's a clean fighter, then I think it's only fair that you should be clean as well. I'm sure there's a lot of guys using PEDs at the top level. I've speculated that many guys are, and it is what it is. But you know what? You still have to pass those drug tests, and you failed 2 of them, and you got caught. So I mean, you got to pay the price. So Do you reward him by just throwing him in his next fight in a title shot? Let's see if they do the same for John Jones, if they allow John Jones to come back. Let's see if he can just walk back into the UFC and get an immediate title shot. I'm curious to see that. I'm definitely curious to see that. All right, guys, you let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Again, this isn't a knock on the legitimacy of Brock Lesnar as a fighter and a UFC combatant per se, but look at the situation and let's ask ourselves, is this the right thing that's being done right now? I say no, but it doesn't really matter. But I just thought I'd get that off my chest and voice my opinion and my feelings on the subject, and I want to see what others think. All right, until next time, Beaver's out. Talk to y'all soon. Peace. Have a great day, man.